Stalker here. So the family was having a bit of a discussion a couple weeks ago, and they happened to bring up something that was interesting. Now, you see right there, I'm driving right by what's called the Collins Brew House. Now, the Collins Brew House, before that, was called the Collins or the Collins Hotel. And the reason they were bringing it up was, at one time, now I had to go look it up, but back in 1992, just long before I was around here, the owner of the facility was charged with arson. And what he had tried to do was burn down the place. The police think it was for insurance money, by opening up a gas line and taking a bunch of electric toasters and jamming forks in them so they'd overheat. And what happened was, a member of the staff actually came to work early that day and smelt the gas, called the fire department, and fire department showed up and basically saved the building. Now, the reason the family talks about it is because a couple members of my wife's family were firefighters for the town of Dundas, you know, back in the 50s and 60s and 70s and so forth. So for them, it's something that's, you know, some of their family members and other relatives were there. And the reason they were talking about that was because I'm going to say a couple months ago, the owner, or the former owner of the facility, okay, I'm just going to say it, somebody tried to assassinate him because he was now the head of one particular local crime family. So yeah, the mafia does exist, and it's pretty much like you see it in The Sopranos. And you know, people were having a good laugh about it and all that sort of stuff. And then I brought up at the table the fact that, oh yeah, they were talking about it, and I went, oh yeah, I met the head of the mafia. And they went, what? And I said, well, here's a story. So I thought, you know what, I'll share it with you guys too. And my best friend, still a very, very good friend of mine, his father was a police officer. He was a detective sergeant, and back in the 60s and 70s, like, the area here wasn't as big, but you know, the cops pretty well knew most of the major criminals. You know, organized crime existed, but essentially, you know, the organized crime guys are pretty smart. They have other people tend to do the dirty work for them, so they don't get their hands dirty. So it's very hard to get them convicted or arrested, for that matter, because a lot of times they're not there, and if something's bad going on, they have a tendency to be on vacation. So anyways, back to how I met the mafia head honcho, the Dom, whatever they call him up here. My buddy's dad, you know, back in the 60s, hands-on type guy. If something broke, he'd fix it himself because he knew how. So he was working on, I'm going to say, their pickup truck, and they needed some part for it because trucks built in the 1960s were not super reliable back then. They were always being worked on, and so what we did was went to a couple places to see if you can find the part he was looking for. And eventually he went and said, well, let's go to so-and-so's place. He might have it, and if he doesn't, he'll know who does have it. And we just went, okay, whatever. So we drove downtown Hamilton, just slightly off from the downtown area, and a small little shop. Nothing really, you know, fancy. Looked like it was built in the 40s and hadn't had a thing done to it since. We walked inside. It wasn't well lit. It was dark and dingy, just sort of what, you know, people think, you know, car shops and whatnot were back then. And there was two guys working behind the counter, and there was an old guy sitting in the corner sipping on a tea or a coffee or something like that. I'm not certain. He's a pretty old guy. So anyways, we walk in the door, and the old guy looks up and sees my buddy's dad and goes, "Hey, Sergeant," and whatever, and he says, "How's it going?" And he starts talking to him, and I figure, well, he just must be some old guy who just hangs around the shops, because a lot of places like that tend to have somebody who either used to work there or is related to the person that owns it. They just hang around and socialize all day. And he was asking like how the wife and kids were and all that sort of stuff, and he introduced his son to the guy and whatnot, and he just mentioned, oh, that's just his friend so and so, and and the old guy's just talking to my buddy for a couple seconds maybe. Then they went back to their small talk, and then one thing they went to another, and the guy, my buddy's dad mentioned he's looking for this part, and the guy says, well, I starts yammering off in Italian to the guy behind the counter, and the guy looks in his book, and he walks out back and comes back in and comes in with the part, and buddy's dad looks at it, and they just sit there and they start arguing about how much he's going to pay for it, and it's something like nowadays you walk into a store and you say, how much is it, and they go $59.99, and you hold out your credit card and just pay. Well, back in the 60s and even in the 70s, somebody say, well, it's $50. Say, well, I'll give you 40, and that's just how it was. And so they went back and forth, and I think I'm going to say the part was $50, and they ended up getting it for like about 30, 35. I can't remember, but so we hop back in the car and head back up to the work on the truck, and as we leave the parking lot, and he says, now boys, hope you're honored. You just met the head of the mafia. And we go, what? He goes, yeah, that old guy sitting back there being all sociable, that was the guy in charge of all the crime in Canada. Now back then the mafia was in two locations, Hamilton and Montreal. That's basically the two headquarters, and the Hamilton crime families of that era were the ones in charge. So this one guy, I honestly don't remember his name, but he was the head honcho, and he seemed like a pleasant guy, but the guy said, yeah, if you owed him money, he'd kill you and your family just to make an example of you. And it's like, whoa, that's kind of scary. So a couple years later, I'm like a senior in high school, and I was getting hijacked by the police to be a ringer for a curling tournament, because I was at the time Ontario type champion type curler guy, and my buddy was also I had the wrong tune. My buddy was also that way, he was a top curler as well too, but he actually was a police officer and had a police bonspiel. So I got hauled out to go with him, and one of the guys we were going with was also an inspector to my buddy's father, who was a sergeant. And they got talking, and they happened to mention something about Pops, I can't remember what his last name was, and I said, oh, is he still around? And he said, oh yeah, in fact, we're going to be driving by his house in a couple minutes. I go, yeah, where does he live? I've always wondered what kind of house a mafia boss would have. He says, well, we'll just drive right by to see it. He says, hopefully we won't get, and the inspector says, hopefully we won't get flagged by the organized crime stakeout, because apparently the police were always staking out the mafia headquarters. And we drove by the house, and it was like it wasn't that much different than every other house in the neighborhood. Instead of having brick, it had stone and a concrete driveway instead of an asphalt driveway. And of course it had the two giant either carved or concrete lions at the end of the driveway sort of thing. So like, I grew up in an Italian neighborhood, so stuff like that really wasn't all that shocking. It just happened to be maybe just a little bit nicer. And it was like, oh, okay. So it's not like you see, like he actually said, like the real top organized crime guys, they like sort of keep themselves lay low. They're not too flashy. He says it's not like you see on TV where the guys are driving Lamborghinis and, you know, beating up people in restaurants and stuff. He says, no, that's a quick way to find yourself in jail. The real guys who run the place are pretty quiet and laid back. They don't draw attention to themselves. Just wasn't certain what that guy was doing. Yeah, so anyways, that was kind of an interesting little story. Hope you found it interesting. It's not that motorcycle related, but I am on a bike. Anyways, Best Stalker signing off.